one of the beautiful things about uh, easily expressed poetry, naturally expressed poetry, that truly is poetry, is that it's memorable. It sticks in the mind. It moves you along and engages you. It's not just the story that engages you. It's the language that attracts you, pulls you through. Hey everyone, today I'm going to review a poetry translation. This is Joe Carlson's translation of Dante's Inferno. So this only recently came out from Roman Roads, and it's a remarkable translation as a piece of English poetry. And so I'm going to review it from that perspective. Obviously, I'm not going to be reviewing the story itself. There are many, many, many translations of it out there. If you have never read Dante, then I recommend that you do so. And I'm not going to be reviewing the translation either. For me, Italian and that dialect and antiquity of Italian is something that I can accompany slightly when I have notes or a translation to help me. But I would like to review this as a piece of poetry. So it's written in blank verse. And blank verse is not free verse. That is, it's not it's not prose with line breaks. Or I remember when someone tried to sell me a Puritan devotional as poetry because these devotionals that had been written in prose had been broken up by that particular editor into poetic lines. So we're not talking about that. He actually thinks carefully about the terza rima of Dante and executes his poetic translation into blank verse. Blank verse is one of the principal ways of just relying on the natural poetry of the English language, working with iambs, with stressed and unstressed offsetting each other, which really plays well into how English works as poetry, not thinking about long and short, but thinking about stressed and unstressed. Now, there are points where I think the verse breaks down because he's not using Miltonian structures. He's not using sprung rhythm. English, I think, very naturally wants to compress and decompress to fit the natural stresses. He sticks to the iambs, and occasionally that does cause difficulties. But I have to tell you, my first reaction as I began to read it, so I just dove in. I later went and read his preface, and I found it quite illuminating, just about his own philosophy of translating. But I was struck within just a few verses at how naturally poetic it read. So I want to read to you from the beginning of Canto 1, and then I want to read a few other little passages to illustrate certain things about the poetry in this translation. So if you're familiar with the beginning of the story, there he finds himself in the deep, dark woods, right? So, Canto 1, The Dark Wood. In the middle of the course of our life, I came to myself in a darkened wood because the right direction had been lost. Ah, how hard a thing to say what it was, this wood, overwhelming, savage, severe. Even the thought of it renews the fear. It was so bitter, death is hardly more. But to tell of the good that I found there, I will speak of the other things I saw. No words can tell how I entered that place. I was so full of sleep at the moment I abandoned the true way. But after, when I had come to the foot of a hill, the place where the valley came to an end, that dark veil that had gripped my heart in fear, I looked on the heights and saw its shoulders robed by then in the rays of the planet, which guides each aright along every path. Then was somewhat quieted the terror the lake of my heart had endured that night, which I had just passed so pitifully. And as the one who, with labored breathing, returns to the shore from out of the deep, turns around to see the dangerous sea, so did my soul, still fleeing, turn itself back to marvel once again at the passage that never before left any alive. After I had rested my weary frame, I went back to that desolate hillside and climbed, the firmer foot always behind. That's the first 30 lines. And listen to how natural this sounds. And as the one who, with labored breathing, returns to the shore from out of the deep, turns around to see the dangerous sea. That's just admirable naturalness. But besides naturalness, there is a lot of poetic, there are a lot of poetic devices that Carlson uses really well. And he's not afraid to just sprinkle them on in there, right? So he's not afraid to rhyme when there's an easy rhyme, because, don't forget, rhyme lends rhythm. So he's not afraid to say, how hard a thing to say what it was. This wood, overwhelming, savage, severe, even the thought of it renews the fear. So good. And actually, that verse right there, the second verse, illustrates a couple of the other ones, right? He embraces alliteration when he has the chance. This wood, overwhelming, savage, severe. And so, whether it's alliteration, assonance, rhyming, he works them in a very natural feeling way, and yet he doesn't feel bound beyond wanting to keep an iambic rhythm to keep a consistent use of those things through the entire translation. So naturalness of reading is emphasized, but he's constantly bringing in poetic phrases, poetic uses that keep the mind engaged and keep the music of the language lively. Not only is the language lively, but he's not afraid to use old-fashioned language either in a way that aids the epicness. Now, it's not uniform, and I'm going to get into that in a second, but so, from Canto 6, and he to me, after long contention, they will come to blood, and the savage sect will drive out the other with much offense. After this, within 3 suns, these must fall, and the other will return with the force of one that even now straddles the shore. And because he is being just so good about the English and what English is good at, keeping that pa-pa-ta-pa-ta-pa-ta-pa-ta, it almost feels like you're reading a translation of Beowulf, right? Like it punches in that Anglo-Saxon way, and it's got this old-fashioned language, and it feels grand and ancient and exalting, which is cool. But sometimes there can be some missteps regarding that. For example, in the beginning of Canto 20, pain unknown must be versified by me, be the theme of the 20th canto of this first canzone of those submerged. Okay, pain unknown must be versified by me. As someone who likes translating poetry, I profoundly sympathize with the awkwardness of this line. There was, something going on in his mind that he wanted to stay faithful to, but looking at the Italian, and this is one of those passages where I'm going to compare this to some other translations. So looking at the Italian, looking at some other translations, I don't know what drove him to put it that way. Pain unknown must be versified by me. And I don't mean to be hitting this one too much, but I know the process, like I feel the process that made that happen. And he himself, in his excellent preface, this is a big work. And so being consistent throughout, what a challenge. So, there is occasional inconsistency, but really, what a great work. And by the way, the preface, very simply written, very plainly written, just an excellent way to think about translating poetry. I may even include it for my Spanish 3 students who will be translating, things like El Cid or, 20th and 19th century poets. So really a pretty great preface. A lot of stirring passages from Canto 22. I have before seen cavalry move camp, set formations, and make a show of force, sometimes retreating for their own safety. I have seen riders ride to your city, O Aretines. I have seen raiders raid, tournaments wound, and jousting run its course, sometimes with bugles and sometimes with bells, with drums and with signals from a castle, both with our own things and with things foreign. Never truly at such a novel pipe did I see cavalry move, nor footmen, nor ships to a signal from land or star. A really colorful language, and of course, he's not the author here; he's the translator. But the color of the language works so much better with just the dedication to the natural English rhythm. And that passage is like most of the book. If you compare it to other translations, I think just much more favorable. Prose translations are sold to students, but should be for scholars. Prose translations are a way to try to be literal about the original language. Some verse translations can get really forced. There's some good ones out there, but some of them can get really forced. And they each have their own value. I really enjoy literal approaches. I like translations that are purposefully old-fashioned. I have to say, this is a really great, just all-rounder. This is the sort of thing that students should read. And this is just a joy to anyone who likes the story, who likes reading poetry. One of the beautiful things about easily expressed poetry, naturally expressed poetry, that truly is poetry, is that it's memorable, it sticks in the mind, it moves you along and engages you. It's not just the story that engages you, it's the language that attracts you, pulls you through. And so this translation does an excellent job of that. Yeah, so I'll close with this little passage from Canto 21, again, the beginning of a canto, but where really there's alliteration, there's repetition, there's assonance, just a great example. And it's not the sort of thing that, if you didn't know the terminology or the techniques, it would still have the effect on you. And that's what's most pleasing about this translation. So from bridge to bridge we went, speaking things of which my comedy cares not to sing, and had kept along the ridge when we stopped to see the next crack in Malabulge and the other useless tears. There I saw a wondrous dark. Good stuff. I really like that first verse there. Bridge to bridge we went, speaking things, comedy cares not to sing. Kudos to Joe Carlson. This is a great edition and highly recommended to you. Peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pinch.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!